The first time Daniel Hayes saw the schoolhouse, it was already falling apart. Not in a dramatic way. Not in the kind of way that made headlines or drew attention. No, this place was quietly dying. The roof sagged like it had given up years ago. Half the windows were broken, the rest clouded over with dust and neglect. The front door leaned off its hinges, barely attached, like it was waiting for the next strong wind to finish the job. Weeds had taken over the yard. Tall, dry, unchecked. Nature didn't rush here. It simply waited and reclaimed. Daniel stood at the rusted gate, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn jacket, staring at what everyone else had already dismissed. Condemned, the listing had said, unsafe structure, land only. But Daniel didn't see land. He saw structure. He saw timber. He saw shelter. And most importantly, he saw something no one else wanted. That was always where the real opportunity lived. The auction took place on a cold Thursday morning. There were maybe a dozen people gathered in front of the county office. Most of them weren't interested in the schoolhouse at all. They were there for nearby farmland, storage units, anything with immediate value. The schoolhouse listing came last. The clerk barely looked up as he read it. Parcel 17B. Abandoned school structure. Condemned. Starting bid, $4. A few people chuckled. Someone behind Daniel muttered, $4 too much. Another voice added, you'd have to pay me to take that thing. Daniel didn't react. He simply raised his hand. I'll take it. The clerk blinked, surprised more by the lack of competition than the bid itself. Any other offers? Silence. Going once, going twice sold. $4. The gavel tapped lightly. And just like that, Daniel Hayes owned a collapsing schoolhouse no one else wanted. Outside, the laughter came easier. You serious? One man asked, shaking his head. What are you going to do with it? Start a ghost tour. Another laughed. He'll be back next week trying to sell the wood for fire scraps. Daniel signed the paperwork without responding. He'd heard it before. People always laughed at the beginning. The road to the schoolhouse wasn't really a road. It was more of a memory of one. Faded tire tracks, overgrown edges, uneven ground that made his old pickup groan in protest as it crawled forward. When he finally reached the building again, it looked even worse up close. The smell hit him first. Damp wood, mold, dust thick enough to taste. Inside, the floor creaked under his weight, each step testing whether it would hold. Desks, what was left of them, lay scattered and broken. A chalkboard still clung to the wall, cracked down the middle like a scar. Someone had spray painted across it years ago. Forgotten. Daniel ran his hand along the surface, wiping away a thin layer of dust. Not yet, he muttered. He didn't start with big plans. That's what most people got wrong. They looked at something like this and imagined a full rebuild. Renovations. Contractors. Loans. Daniel didn't have money for that. What he had was time and patience. The first thing he did was clean. Not perfectly. Not thoroughly. Just enough. He cleared debris from one corner of the main room, dragged out broken furniture, swept dust into piles, and pushed it out the door. By sunset, he had carved out a space just big enough to stand in without feeling like the building was collapsing on top of him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The second thing he did was fix the roof. Not all of it, just the worst part. He climbed up with salvaged sheets of metal he'd picked up from a scrapyard miles away. Bent, mismatched, barely usable. But usable was enough. By the end of the week, the largest hole in the roof was covered. Rain wouldn't pour straight in anymore. That alone changed everything. The town noticed. Not because they cared, but because it was unusual. You see that guy out at the old school? Someone asked at the diner. Yeah, still at it. What's he even doing? Beats me. Wasting time, if you ask me. The laughter was quieter now, but it was still there. Daniel kept going. Day after day, he worked odd jobs in town. Fixing fences, hauling debris, anything that paid in cash or materials. Wood, nails, tools, whatever he could get. Then he drove back to the schoolhouse and kept building. Not outward, inward. He reinforced beams first, found the weak points, braced them, then the floor, then the walls. Each small fix made the structure a little stronger, a little safer, a little less forgotten. By the end of the first month, something had changed. The building no longer felt like it was about to collapse at any moment. It still looked terrible from the outside, but inside, there was order. One room cleared, stabilized, usable. Daniel set up a small cot there, a lantern, a table made from salvaged boards. He didn't move in completely. Not yet. But he stayed longer each day. The second month brought problems. Real ones. A storm rolled through late one night. Wind howled across the empty fields, slamming against the structure like it was trying to finish what time had started. Daniel arrived the next morning to find part of the roof torn loose again. Water had seeped in. One of the beams he'd reinforced had shifted. For a moment, he just stood there, silent, taking it in. Anyone else would have seen confirmation of what everyone had been saying. A lost cause. A mistake. For dollars wasted. Daniel exhaled slowly, then set his tools down, and got to work. He rebuilt the damaged section stronger than before. Not prettier. Stronger. He added support where there hadn't been any. Reinforced connections. Adjusted angles to better handle wind. It took him 3 days. 3 long, exhausting days. But when he finished, the structure didn't just look repaired. It looked resilient. That's when the shift really began. Not in the town. In the building. The schoolhouse was no longer just surviving. It was holding. By month 3, Daniel had a routine. Work in town during the day. Build at the schoolhouse until dark. Sleep. Repeat. Slowly, the space transformed. The main room became functional. Then a second room. He patched windows with clear panels scavenged from an old greenhouse. Light started coming in again. For the first time in years, the building didn't feel abandoned. People still drove by occasionally, slowing down just enough to look. Curiosity replacing ridicule. Is he still working on that place? Yeah. Still standing? Yeah. By the end of the 3rd month, something unexpected happened. Daniel stopped thinking of it as a project and started thinking of it as an asset. He wasn't just fixing a building. He was creating something. Quietly. Slowly. Intentionally. Something no one else had seen value in. And somewhere between the reinforced beams, the patched roof, and the light finally cutting through clean windows, the $4 schoolhouse stopped being a joke. It just wasn't obvious yet. But it would be. Soon. By the start of the 4th month, the schoolhouse had crossed a line most people never noticed. It no longer depended on effort alone. It had begun to return value. It started small. A farmer named Ellis drove up one afternoon while Daniel was reinforcing the back wall. Ellis leaned against his truck, watching for a minute before speaking. "You the one fixing this place up?" Daniel nodded, not stopping his work. Ellis glanced around slowly, taking in the cleared rooms, the patched windows, the reinforced beams. "Huh," he muttered. "Didn't think it'd still be standing by now." Daniel gave a faint half-smile. Neither did anyone else. Ellis chuckled. Then he gestured toward the open interior. "You got space in there?" Daniel paused. "Depends what for." That was the first time someone saw the schoolhouse not as a ruin, but as something usable. Ellis needed temporary storage, dry, covered, and secure enough to keep equipment out of the weather. Nothing fancy, just functional. Daniel walked him through the building, showed him the reinforced sections, the sealed roof, the rooms that stayed dry even after the last storm. Ellis nodded slowly. "I'll pay you." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then you can use it." It wasn't a big deal. A small amount of money. Short-term use. But it was the first time the building gave something back. And that changed everything. Word spread quietly. Not fast. Not loudly. But steadily. A contractor needed a place to store tools for a nearby job. A traveling crew needed temporary shelter for supplies. Someone even asked about using one of the rooms as a workspace for a few weeks. Daniel didn't advertise. Didn't promote. He just said yes when it made sense. And no when it didn't. By month 5, the building had a rhythm. Different rooms used for different purposes. Nothing permanent. Nothing overbuilt. But always in use. Always active. Always earning. The town noticed. This time, not with laughter. With silence. At the diner, the tone had changed. "That place out there, it's actually being used now." "Yeah, I heard he's got people paying to store stuff. In that old school. Guess it's not so useless after all." Daniel didn't care what they said. He never had. Because the real shift wasn't in their opinions. It was in the numbers. He kept track of everything. Every dollar that came in. Every repair. Every improvement. Every material. By the end of the 5th month, the schoolhouse had done something no one expected. It had paid for itself. For dollars. Recovered. Then doubled. Then tripled. But Daniel didn't stop. That's what separated him from everyone else who would have quit early. He wasn't chasing recovery. He was building leverage. He reinforced more sections. Opened up another usable room. Improved the structure not for appearance, but for reliability, for function, for endurance. Then came the 6th month, and with it, the bank. Daniel didn't go looking for them. They came to him. A white SUV rolled up one morning, tires crunching against the gravel. It looked out of place immediately. Clean, polished, corporate. 2 people stepped out, one in a suit, the other holding a folder. They stood there for a moment, staring at the building like they were trying to reconcile what they'd heard with what they were seeing. Daniel walked out to meet them. "Can I help you?" The man in the suit stepped forward, offering a polite, practiced smile. "Daniel Hayes. That's right. I'm from the regional bank office. We've been reviewing some local property activity." Daniel said nothing, just waited. The man glanced back at the building again. "This property, parcel 17B. You purchased it 6 months ago." "For $4, Daniel replied. The man gave a small, almost embarrassed chuckle. "Yes, that's the one." He opened the folder. Inside were documents. Photos, notes, records. Not of what the building had been, but of what it had become. "We've noticed," the man continued, "that this location has seen increasing usage." Daniel crossed his arms slightly. "It's functional." The man nodded. "That's exactly why we're here." There was a brief pause, the kind where the tone of the conversation shifts, subtly, but permanently. "We're interested," the man said carefully, "in discussing potential development opportunities with you." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He let the silence sit. 6 months ago, no one wanted this place. No one saw value. No one even considered it worth more than $4. Now, the bank had driven out here. In person. With paperwork. "Development," Daniel repeated. "Yes," the man said. "Expansion. Structuring. Possibly financing improvements that could increase long-term returns." Daniel looked past him, back at the building. The reinforced beams. The repaired roof. The rooms that had slowly come back to life. He thought about the nights spent working under a lantern. The storms. The doubt. The laughter. Then he looked back at the man. "I didn't build this on loans," Daniel said calmly. The man nodded quickly. "Of course. And that's exactly why this is such a strong position." Another pause. "We'd like to work with you," the man added. "Not advise. Not approve. Not control. Work." And that was the moment everything came full circle. 6 months earlier, Daniel had stood in front of a room full of people who laughed at him for spending $4. Now, a representative from the bank stood in front of him, careful with his words, measured in tone, respectful. Daniel stepped forward slightly, and for the first time in the entire conversation, the balance shifted completely. "If we're going to talk," Daniel said, "we do it on my terms." The man didn't hesitate. Of course. No laughter. No mockery. No dismissal. Just respect. The same land. The same building. The same man. The only difference was time. And what he chose to do was something everyone else ignored. The wind moved softly through the open field, brushing against the side of the schoolhouse. But this time, the building didn't feel abandoned, didn't feel forgotten, didn't feel like it was waiting to collapse. It stood, strong, used, valuable. And Daniel Hayes? He wasn't the man who bought a $4 mistake anymore. He was the man the bank had to ask permission from.